Hey everyone, so One Piece chapter 1028 just came out, and we started off with a pretty major twist, one of the biggest twists that we've had in recent memory, which is that the Marines are here. So, for a long time, there was, I think, in the early stages of the Wano arc, I think people did believe that, hey, the Marines might show up. Then that kind of quieted down a little bit as the actual Battle of Onigashima began to play out, and many started to feel that, okay, it's just going to essentially play out here between the pirates and no outside forces. I have always maintained that I feel that the Marines are going to show up because that is, kind of what was hinted at during the intermission between Act 2 and Act 3. If you remember chapter 957 with Sengoku basically strongly hinting at towards the end of the chapter that the Marines cannot afford to stay out of being involved in Wano. So the Marines are in fact here, they're at Wano's doorstep. Now, it's conditional though, right? Because at least from the discussion among CP0, it seems to be implied that the Marines only want to take action if it appears that Kaido is going to be defeated. So in that unlikely event that they want to take action. Now, that's a little bit odd considering the Marines also don't believe that Kaido is going to be, well, CP0 certainly doesn't seem to believe that Kaido is going to be defeated. And in general, I'm sure the Marines certainly don't believe that Kaido is going to be defeated. So it's a little funny if they sent, an entire armada just to check, just to show up to Wano just to hang around and check if Kaido's defeated, and if it's like no, then they're just gonna head back. But I guess that's, the way things are set up to be. So let's see what they do, right? Let's see how much of an active role they play in the events that are going to come up. Now, I do think it's interesting that Lucci in particular is spearheading CP0 in general. So from what we've seen of Lucci so far, he does seem to be the highest ranking authority of CP0 that has shown up on page so far, right? I think every time that Lucci has shown up as part of CP0, it does seem that he is the person with the most, the highest tier of command, I suppose. So I don't know if he's really the leader of CP0 exactly, if he's their strongest member. I always imagined that CP0 would have had some other leader that we have yet to see, but so far it just seems to be Lucci, which I'm perfectly fine with. It feels fitting that, a previous arc boss is now, still the boss of that same organization of Cypherpole, but just now upgraded to the highest tier of that organization. I mean, it makes sense that Lucci would be the boss. I just kind of always figured, I was like, okay, well, what if there's someone a little higher up among CP0? But Lucci makes sense. I am interested in the CP0 members that are currently on Onigashima, as they have just been given the order that, capture Nico Robin at all costs. Flash, the whole setup of CP0 just being like, we gotta capture Nico Robin at all costs, and like Cypherpole being like, yeah, we'll do it. It's just so Enies Lobby all over again. It's hilarious. It's just, I'm just reading the pages and I'm like, is it 2021? What's going on here? Like, this is just the same story. Not in a bad way, I'm saying. It feels weird, right? Like, it feels like a bit of deja vu just seeing Lucci in Wano. Lucci back to that old shtick of talking about, well, we gotta capture Nico Robin at all costs. And like his other Cypherpole people are like, yeah, we're gonna do it. So I think that's interesting. Some people have mentioned that maybe Brook's matchup is going to be Cypherpole, CP0. I could see that just because, it's Brook has not yet gotten a matchup, and it does seem like CP0 is going to make a concerted effort to capture Nico Robin at this point. I think that it's a little odd that Brook's being, if that's the case, I think it's a little odd that Brook would be given his matchup so late in the, in the scheme of the battle, considering, Oda likes a certain flow of things usually, right? With, I think, generally knock out all of the lower level fights, then usually second to last fight is like Zoro, sometimes Zoro and Sanji, but I think at the very least always second to last fight is Zoro, and then you get to Luffy. So I think just the fact that Zoro and Sanji's fights are currently ongoing, and now there's the prospect of maybe CP0 versus Brook. That's a little strange to me. I can't imagine a scenario where Oda has Brook's fight after Zoro and Sanji's, but before Luffy's. So let's wait and see. Usopp as well has not gotten anything so far. As for the Marines' full role, like what they could actually do in Wano, I'm going to save that discussion for a little later on. Now, next up we have Momonosuke and Yamato. Momonosuke is on his own. I think the moment is obviously coming for Momonosuke to, hold up the island. One thing that I think is pretty interesting is that Yamato has gone to disable the bombs, right? I don't know what that means. I don't know how she's going to disable the bombs. If I had to guess, maybe she has some ice-based abilities that could help in this scenario, right? Everything we've seen from her so far, from the Makami fruit. I hope I got it right this time. I know last time I got her dog fruit wrong, but from the Makami fruit, we've seen everything that we've seen so far has been ice-based. We've even seen that she's capable of creating a sort of shell made out of ice. She used that to protect herself from the Thunder Bagua to a degree. So I wonder if that's going to be her method of trying to stop the bombs, short of just chucking them out of the window, which would have the same effect essentially as just letting them fall on the flower capital. So let's assume that she's gonna actually disable the bombs or do something about them. That does have me thinking though, all right, pause for a second. Why is Oda having Yamato disable the bombs? If Momonosuke is just going to hold up the Onigashima thing the entire time successfully, then what's the point of saying that, well, Yamato has to go disable the bombs? Could it be that Onigashima is eventually going to come down on the flower capital? Could it be? Which is why Oda needed the bombs disabled before such an event could occur? I'm just asking questions. Yeah, I'm just asking questions. That came out weird. But it's because I'm excited by the possibility of my favorite theory, the raid failing. Anyway, the main part of this chapter was obviously Sanji and Queen. So this was... okay, this was the funniest moment of Onigashima. Okay, I don't know if it's the funniest moment of Onigashima so far. No, it might... I don't know, it's up there. I think the last time I laughed like this was probably... you guys know what I'm referring to, right? I'm referring to the entire section from Queen shooting out in snake mode at Sanji to the Brachial launcher, okay? I think the most I'd laughed in Onigashima up to this point was basically likely the Luffy and company traveling up to the top level of Onigashima. And the gifters the recurring gag of the gifters that they met along the way, I thought that was funny at a point. But this was really funny because this was it. I mean, flashback to, Sasaki flying with his Triceratops fruit, which was obviously not something a Triceratops can do. But this was even more ridiculous. I promise you, when Queen had his panel of, fully extending, preparing for a special move, and then just shot straight out of his skin, I actually, legitimately jaw dropped. I was absolutely confused. It's like, are we in Looney Tunes? What's going on here? And then the double gag of the Brachial launcher shooting him. I enjoyed that quite a bit. I thought that was really funny. Actually, I laughed both times. I really enjoyed that Queen part of the chapter. I think Queen has definitely been the most entertaining of the Calamities so far. Probably the most entertaining of the Toby Roppo in general. Ulti is pretty cool. I don't know. Queen's been the most entertaining, I think. So that's the gags aside, the fight in general. All right, I'm conflicted about the fight. On one hand, I like the fact that Zoro and Sanji are finally doing as one would have expected they would do against a Yonko commander, okay? Because, I don't want any sort of... Here's the reality of it, okay? The first several chapters that we got to see Zoro and Sanji versus King and Queen, I mean, even just when it was hypothetically just Sanji versus King and Queen, right? I mean, Sanji came into the whole fight, right, kicking Queen around while knocking Perospero around very easily, and Sanji went a lot, this was the first chapter, I believe, that we got to see on panel Queen doing damage to Sanji. I might be wrong on that, all right? Might be wrong on that, but for a long time, it was Sanji who was, Sanji got plenty of hits in on Queen. Sanji seemed to be doing just fine. No worries at all, which is very confusing if you look at Sanji's previous interaction with Doflamingo, right? But Sanji was doing just fine against Queen. Got a lot of hits in against Queen. Queen couldn't really, nail him down. And then Zoro came in and Zoro started doing the same to King. It wasn't until last chapter that King really got a hit in against Zoro, right? And then started making Zoro struggle. So, I mean, because when Zoro and Sanji first started this fight, right, it was like they were taking care of Mr. Five and Miss Valentine with that double-page spread. It was just very easy for them at first. And, they went a couple chapters with essentially having no challenge in those fights, which was just surprising because we've come to expect, from Luffy versus Cracker, Luffy versus Katakuri, Luffy versus Doflamingo, we've come to expect commanders to be, we've been waiting and waiting for Zoro and Sanji to finally get to fight. characters of that level. And we certainly were not expecting, I don't think people were expecting them to have been handling it as easily as they were. Not to say that they can't still win, right? Not to say that we weren't expecting them to ultimately win. But I think this is more so what we were thinking was going to happen, which is that they would have a severe degree of difficulty initially in the matchup, similar to like Luffy versus Katakuri, right? So this chapter was the first chapter that really felt like, okay, Sanji might be in over his head against Queen. I will say that I think last chapter we did get like one panel showing a cutaway during the Zoro versus King fight where we got to see in the background kind of like Sanji, I think, buried under some rubble or something like that against Queen. So that's a little hint at the direction his fight started going. But this does make sense, right? So Sanji's still able to do like hold out against Queen, but actually winning in this current form, right, without using the Germa suit, it did seem like a tall order from the start. So I like that this is happening. Queen did seem, very, very capable this chapter. By capable, I suppose I mean more effectively using, a wide array of both, cybernetic abilities, but then also, just the straight up Brachiosaurus brute strength, but also snake-like ability. Like, Queen just showed a very large repertoire this chapter, and that's something that I'm enjoying about both King and Queen, which is that I think I've said this before, but with zones, it's so easy to fall into a trap where, not a trap, but it's so easy to fall into a situation where the zones are just, they're just brute-like fighters, and you don't get a lot of variety out of their abilities like you would out of, say, even just like a mythical zone with like, how many ice abilities has Yamato shown? How many abilities can Marco show, right? A lot of these more mystical, inherently powerful fruits like mythical zones, right? They can show you a wider array of abilities, whereas with a pterodactyl, whereas with a brachiosaurus, I'm a little bit like, okay, so are they just going to be strong? Like, strong, pterodactyl can fly around, how much can they really do? No, I like the fact that Oda is showing that, okay, with King, he can actually use the pterodactyl fruit. He essentially is one giant blade, similar to Mr. One, but like on steroids, so like really amped up like a giant blade, and he can do a lot of cutting attacks, and he's Lunarian, so he can use fire, and he can use straight up normal swordsmanship. So and the flying is basically a bonus. So I like that fact that there is a lot of variety to King's abilities, and we might just be scratching the iceberg because we still don't know fully what a Lunarian can do, how much fire can he actually control. And then on Queen's side, it's not just like, robot arms and stuff like that. It's laser beams, it's this brachio launcher thing, it's modding his entire body so that he can separate parts of it to turn into a snake-like form and basically strangle the opponent. And then obviously the Brachiosaurus is brute strength, brute force, and everything like that. So I like the variety that we're getting from both these characters. It makes sense. They're calamities. They should have like a really, really strong repertoire of abilities aside from just being physically capable. R.I.P. Jack, who really was just a mammoth in the end. Literally just a mammoth in the end. So, it is what it is. At least who's who do you... Rokushiki. Okay, we're not going to dwell on Jack. I still think Jack's going to make a comeback. Not really. Well, I don't know. All right, we just want to talk about Jack, all right? Let's just not talk about Jack. So, last part I'll say is basically on Sanji's end of things, right? Sanji's end of things, I am a little confused in general. I'm just confused, right? So maybe you guys can help me out. I'm confused basically on the direction that Oda wants to take, because clearly this is a moment of, okay, so Sanji's been saying, no, I don't want to use the Germa suit. No, I don't want to have the same abilities as those guys, etc., right? And a large part of Whole Cake Island, I think most people would agree, in fact, it was explicitly spelled out for us at the end of the arc by Judge himself, that like the fact that Sanji, by Judge and Luffy's interaction, that, a lot of this arc was about Sanji just staying true to himself, and Sanji not needing to be like Germa, not needing to be some, perfect soldier, right? To essentially be great in his own right? And that is what Luffy told him. That is what Judge called him out for. That was what that entire scene kind of like put a bow on the arc for, right? So Sanji staying himself was important to most of Whole Cake Island, all right? So that seemed to be a lesson or takeaway for his character there. Now it seems like Oda is doing something new with Sanji's character, which is he's kind of forcing Sanji into a situation where he is having to open up to the idea of using, obviously, the raid suit, which Sanji did ultimately use earlier on in the arc, and I guess that was a little bit of a prelude to the bigger transformation, which was his body actually changing into becoming a Germa soldier, right? Or not a Germa soldier, you know what I mean, like a Germa android, whatever those guys are. Brain's a little fuzzy right now, it's the morning, right? So, what is the direction Oda is going to take Sanji's character right now? Because so far it's just been, I don't want this, I don't want this, I don't want to be like them, I want to be myself, etc., right? I want to remain human. Are we going to have the entire fight play out with Sanji basically complaining the entire time that, hey, I don't want to be, you know, like those, I don't want to be like my brothers, you know, Queen, I'm beating you around, but I'm not happy about it? Is it going to be a little more like immediate, like kind of when Sanji put on the raid suit, he was immediately just like, okay, you know what, I can roll with this, I like the advantages that come with this. I would prefer if it's not that way because it kind of feels a little bit cheap if Sanji, you know, the moment that he's just like, oh, well, actually I am pretty strong now that my enhancements are kicking in. You know what, forget it, I just like it this way. So it would feel a little bit cheap because it would feel a little bit like, why spend so much time focusing on Sanji not wanting to be like them, wanting to separate himself from his family, if just the moment that he gets a little bit of a boost out of it, you know, a combat boost out of it, he just throws all that to the wind and is okay with it. So what I'm interested to see is essentially, what is Oda trying to get at for Sanji? Are we going to get some point of closure for Sanji? I think some point of closure, some sort of actual like reconciliation with his thoughts of basically, you know, his past trauma and what he's been trying to separate himself from, you know, and just being content with being himself rather than having been forced into the mold that his father was making him. Are we going to get some sort of reconciliation with that, like with his past and him being okay with having these abilities beyond just a superficial level of like, oh, well, it helps me fight better, therefore I'm okay with it. I hope that's the direction that we're headed. So I hope that this actually could turn into one of Sanji's most meaningful fights in the entire series, because Sanji's an interesting character in that a lot of his fights throughout One Piece are not actually, how do you say? They're not meant for character growth the way that a lot of the other Straw Hats fights are. So a lot of Sanji's fights do show off his wits more, they show off his wits and his strength in a nice little combination, but he doesn't have as much character growth in his fights as a lot of the other Straw Hats do. So I think that this could be a rare and very special fight for Sanji. I'm definitely looking forward to it. So if you enjoyed this, then definitely like, comment, and subscribe, and I will talk to you all next week.